In the scorching heat of the North African desert in 1941, British soldiers faced an enemy more dangerous than Rommel's Afrika Korps. Their fuel was disappearing, not from enemy attacks, but from their own containers. The British 4-gallon flimsies were living up to their nickname, thin steel plates soldered together, leaking up to 40% of their precious fuel across the rocky terrain. One quartermaster reported starting with 70,000 gallons and arriving with just 30,000. His superiors called that a good effort. Meanwhile, German troops had a different problem. They had so much reliable fuel transport capacity that they were siphoning Allied supplies with rubber hoses attached to their superior containers. These rectangular steel cans, which the British would soon call jerry cans after the slang term for Germans, were so effective that Allied soldiers would risk their lives to capture them from abandoned enemy vehicles. When America finally decided to copy the German design, military procurement made a decision to save money. They changed one seemingly small detail. That decision would cost countless lives, waste millions of gallons of fuel, and nearly derail the Allied advance across France. This is the story of how America almost lost World War II over a fuel can. The story begins not in 1941, but in 1937 in the industrial town of Schwelm in Germany's Ruhr Valley. Chief engineer Vinzenz Grunvogel at the Mueller engineering firm had been given an assignment directly from the highest levels of the Wehrmacht. Hitler understood that Germany's weakest link would be fuel supply. The Blitzkrieg strategy, lightning war, demanded rapid mechanized advances deep into enemy territory. And that meant solving a problem no army had properly addressed. How do you transport fuel across hundreds of miles of battlefield? The existing fuel containers across all militaries were essentially the same design that had been used since World War I. They were simple rectangular tins with screw caps, requiring wrenches to open, funnels to fill, and separate spouts to pour. They leaked constantly. They required wooden crates for protection during shipping. They were heavy, awkward, and fragile. Grunvogel knew he could do better. What emerged was the Wehrmacht-Einheitskanister, the Armed Forces Standard Canister. It held 20 liters, about 5.3 gallons, 25% more than the Allied 4-gallon containers. But the capacity was the least impressive feature. The can was constructed from two stamped steel halves, welded together around the perimeter like an automobile fuel tank. This single welded seam was far stronger than the multiple soldered or crimped seams used in other designs. The sides featured distinctive X-shaped indentations that served multiple purposes. They added structural rigidity, allowed the contents to expand and contract with temperature changes, and protected the can if dropped from a vehicle. An air pocket formed under the handles when filled properly, which also allowed the can to float if dropped in water, a feature that would save countless cans from being lost at sea or in rivers. But the genius was in the details. The can had 3 handles. The Wehrmacht specified that a soldier must be able to carry either 2 full containers or 4 empty ones. The center handle allowed one man to carry 1 full can in each hand, balanced. The outer handles meant 2 men could grip either side and pass the can between them in a bucket brigade line, using the center handle as the pass-through. A strong soldier could grab the outer handles of 2 cans sitting side by side with one hand and carry 4 cans at once. The spout was revolutionary. Instead of a screw cap requiring tools, it used a cam lever mechanism with a snap closure. You could open or close it with one hand, even wearing thick gloves in winter. The spout was long enough to reach into vehicle fuel tanks without needing a separate funnel. An integrated air pipe ran to the air pocket beneath the handles, creating a breather system that allowed fuel to pour smoothly and quickly. No glugging, no spillage. The interior was lined with an impervious plastic coating, originally developed for steel beer barrels, that prevented corrosion and allowed the same can to carry fuel, water, or oil without contamination. A gasket in the spout's closure made it completely leak-proof. Even the pin that secured the lever closed was welded to the can so it couldn't be lost in the field. By 1939, the German military had stockpiled thousands of these cans in anticipation of war. The British flimsy, officially the petrol, oil, and water can, was everything the jerry can wasn't. It held just 4 imperial gallons. It was made from multiple panels of thin steel crimped and soldered together. Transport over rough terrain resulted in 25% fuel loss on average through seam failures and punctures, and in some cases, over 50% of the fuel leaked out during the journey. The leaked fuel gave vehicles a dangerous propensity to catch fire. The container required a wrench to remove the cap, which was a separate piece that could be lost. Then you needed a funnel to fill it and a separate spout to pour it. That's 4 required parts, not counting the can itself. The handle was a single strip of bent steel that dug painfully into your hand if you tried to carry it any distance. British soldiers called them flimsies with bitter sarcasm. The flimsies were so hated that British soldiers developed an alternative use for them. They'd cut them down, fill them with sand, stones, and a dose of gasoline, light them on fire, and use them as kettles to make tea. That was considered a better use than actually transporting fuel. The Americans weren't much better. Their containers had similar construction flaws: thin panels, crimped seams prone to leakage, screw caps that required tools. In 1939, an American engineer named Paul Pleiss was building a vehicle to drive to India with a German colleague. They realized they had no emergency water storage. The German engineer, who had access to the stockpile at Berlin Tempelhof Airport, gave Pleiss 3 jerry cans and complete manufacturing specifications. Pleiss flew back to Philadelphia and told American military officials about the can. He could raise no interest. The military wasn't concerned. War was still distant. Why worry about fuel containers? That attitude would prove catastrophic. British companies, including Briggs Motor Bodies, Vauxhall Motors, and the Pressed Steel Company, began manufacturing copies of the German design. The British didn't try to improve it. They didn't cut corners. They recognized perfection when they saw it and replicated it exactly. Welded seams, cam lever closure, internal plastic lining, integrated air pipe, the works. British jerry cans were marked with the government arrow mark, representing a sword, WD for War Department, the manufacturer's initials, and the date. But functionally, they were identical to the German original. The same small diameter spout with lever cap, the same 2-piece welded construction, the same reliability. By early 1943, 2 million British jerry cans had been sent to North Africa. By early 1944, they were being manufactured in the Middle East. The transformation was dramatic. British logistics became reliable. Fuel arrived where it was needed, when it was needed, in the quantities that had been calculated. The jerry can had become so obviously superior that even Soviet forces copied the design and adopted it as their standard liquid container. Meanwhile, America was preparing for war. Paul Pleiss's lone jerry can in American possession was sent to Camp Holabird, Maryland, where it was redesigned. And here's where the story takes its tragic turn. American military procurement officers looked at the German design and decided they could cut costs. The new American design, which would become known as the Blitz can, retained the handles, size, and shape, but the German recessed welded seam was replaced with rolled seams that were crimped together. Those rolled seams were cheaper and faster to manufacture. They were also prone to leakage. The complex cam lever closure system was simplified to a basic screw cap. The internal plastic lining was removed entirely for the fuel cans. The official reasoning was cost and manufacturing speed. America would need millions of these cans. Every cent saved per unit would multiply across the entire war effort. But what the procurement officers didn't understand, or chose to ignore, was that those expensive features of the German design weren't luxuries, they were essential. The rolled seams that saved money in manufacturing split constantly during transport. The fuel cans without internal lining had no protection against corrosion. The screw caps leaked constantly in desert heat. They required a wrench or large screwdriver to open and close. Without the integrated air pipe, pouring was slow and awkward, requiring a separate venting can or frequent pauses to let air in. While American troops took 2 minutes or more to empty a Blitz can into a jeep under fire, German soldiers were filling their Kübelwagens in half the time. In combat, those extra seconds could mean the difference between escape and death.
By 1943, the scale of America's fuel container problem was becoming clear. A single standard U.S. 2.5-ton truck could carry 875 gallons of fuel loaded in jerry cans. But American forces were using a mix of their own leaky Blitz cans, captured German jerry cans, and British-made jerry cans. U.S. logisticians requested over 1.3 million cans per month to replace losses. The losses were staggering. In October 1944 alone, 3.5 million jerry cans were reported lost. These weren't just stolen or abandoned. Many leaked so badly they were discarded as useless. Troops who found German or British cans would hoard them, knowing they actually worked. The American Blitz cans became a running joke when they weren't causing rage and frustration. In August 1944, lack of cans, caused by losses from leakage and abandonment, actually limited the supply of fuel that could be brought forward to combat units, even though fuel was available in rear areas. Think about that. America had fuel, it had trucks, it had supply lines, but it couldn't get fuel to the tanks and trucks at the front because it didn't have reliable containers to put it in. General Patton's Third Army was racing across France after the D-Day breakout. His advance was limited not by German resistance, not by tired troops, not by broken vehicles, but by fuel logistics. The famous Red Ball Express, the massive truck convoy system that supplied the advancing armies, was partially hamstrung by container failures. Drivers would arrive at the front with partially empty cans, fuel having leaked out during the rough journey. By late 1942, the evidence was overwhelming. Daniels Report, field complaints, British success with copied jerry cans, Soviet adoption of the design. Even American troops were using captured German cans whenever possible. Finally, the military canceled development of yet another improved American fuel canister and agreed to properly copy the German design. But manufacturing takes time. Factories had to retool. Workers had to be trained on the welding techniques. The plastic lining compound had to be sourced. Meanwhile, British manufacturers ramped up production. The Allies agreed that Britain would produce all the cans needed for the invasion of Europe since they had such a head start. Millions were ready by D-Day in June 1944. By VE Day in May 1945, some 21 million Allied jerry cans had been scattered across Europe. President Roosevelt himself observed in November 1944, "Without these cans, it would have been impossible for our armies to cut their way across France at a lightning pace which exceeded the German blitzkrieg of 1940. But here's the bitter truth. If America had simply copied the German design correctly from the beginning, how many lives would have been saved? How much faster could the Allied advance have been? How much fuel wouldn't have been wasted in the desert sand? We'll never know the exact numbers, but the cost was paid in blood and time. Let's break down exactly what made the difference. The German jerry can weighed 11.5 pounds empty. The American Blitz can weighed 10 pounds. That 1.5-pound savings per can seemed smart to procurement officers sitting in comfortable offices in Washington. But that weight wasn't wasted. It was the welded seam instead of crimped, the thicker steel, the reinforced structure.
The internal plastic lining in German cans prevented corrosion, meaning they could last for years. The American fuel cans without lining began corroding immediately, contaminating the fuel and requiring frequent replacement. The German cam lever closure could be operated with one hand in 3 seconds. The American screw cap required 2 hands and a tool and took 20 to 30 seconds to open. The integrated air pipe in the German spout allowed fuel to pour in a smooth stream at maximum flow rate. Without it, fuel glugged and splashed, requiring you to pause repeatedly to let air in, doubling or tripling the pour time. In a combat zone, under fire, or trying to refuel during a brief tactical pause, these differences weren't minor inconveniences, they were potentially lethal. The German can was constructed from 2 stamped steel pieces that interlocked together, requiring only one weld around the equator, with a plastic liner sandwiched between for added security. This prevented leaks and made manufacturing faster once you had the tooling. The American design used more pieces and more assembly steps, taking longer despite being simpler.
After the war, the jerry can became a global standard. NATO forces still use the German design today. That's why it's often called the NATO jerry can. The Soviet Union continued producing the German design throughout the Cold War, and modern Russia still manufactures it. It's used worldwide for fuel, water, and other liquids in both military and civilian contexts. The American Blitz can continued to be manufactured for decades, but it never achieved the same reliability. Many post-war surplus American cans were modified with German-style spouts for commercial use in delivering heating oil because the original screw caps were so unreliable. Even American civilians recognized the German design's superiority. Today, you can buy plastic jerry cans based on the German design. Finnish designer Eero Rislaki created a plastic version in 1970 that retained the key features: reinforced structure, proper spout, reliable closure. Modern manufacturers produce high-density polyethylene versions that are lighter than steel, but maintain the essential design principles that Grunvogel established in 1937. The original German jerry cans, if properly maintained, still work perfectly today. Some are nearly 90 years old. Compare that to the American Blitz cans, most of which leaked from day one and were discarded long ago. There's a reason that vintage NATO jerry cans command premium prices at military surplus stores, while old American cans are considered collector curiosities rather than functional equipment. So what's the real story here? It's not just about a fuel can, it's about the danger of penny-wise, pound-foolish thinking. American procurement officers looked at the German jerry can and saw places to cut costs. They saw unnecessary features. They saw over-engineering. What they didn't see was that every single feature of that design was there for a reason, learned through careful engineering and testing. The welded seam wasn't expensive for no reason. It was the only way to create a truly leak-proof container that could withstand battlefield conditions. The internal lining wasn't a luxury, it was essential for longevity and preventing fuel contamination. The cam lever closure wasn't overcomplicated, it was the fastest, most reliable system that could be operated with gloves in any weather. This is the classic military procurement trap, trying to save money up front without calculating the total cost of ownership. Those savings of a few dollars per can translated into millions of gallons of wasted fuel, countless hours of wasted time, degraded combat effectiveness, extended supply lines, and ultimately lives lost because fuel didn't arrive when and where it was needed. The Allies understood this immediately. When they saw the German design, they didn't try to improve it or make it cheaper. They copied it exactly, knowing that sometimes the original is the best. The Soviets did the same. Even the Germans' enemies recognized that they'd achieved something close to perfect in this humble container. The jerry can is still considered one of the greatest examples of industrial design in history. It solved a complex problem elegantly. It was manufacturable at scale. It was intuitive to use. It was nearly indestructible.
And it did its job so well that the basic design hasn't changed in almost 90 years because it doesn't need to. Vincenz Grunvogel's jerry can represents form and function at their zenith. Every curve, every indent, every feature served multiple purposes. The three handles, the X-shaped reinforcements, the air pocket, the welded seam, the plastic lining, the cam lever closure. Take away any one element and the whole system becomes less effective. American engineers eventually figured this out, but it took years of battlefield experience, mountains of evidence, and immeasurable waste before procurement officers would admit that sometimes you can't improve on a good design by making it cheaper. Sometimes the original is the best. Today, if you're serious about overlanding, off-roading, emergency preparedness, or any situation where reliable fuel storage matters, you buy NATO jerry cans, the design the Germans perfected in 1937, not the American Blitz cans, which are still produced, but still problematic. The market has spoken. Nearly 90 years later, Grunvogel's design remains the gold standard. So the next time you see one of those distinctive rectangular cans with three handles and an X-shaped indent, remember, you're looking at a piece of World War II history that helped determine the outcome of the war, not through firepower or tactics, but through superior engineering applied to the most mundane but essential task, carrying fuel from point A to point B without losing half of it along the way. The German jerry cans saved the Allies in spite of themselves, and all because some American procurement officers thought they could cut corners on a fuel container. The lesson is timeless. When you find a perfect design, copy it exactly. Don't try to make it cheaper. Don't try to simplify it. Sometimes the original really is the best.